In the fall of 2021, Gil and his friend Andrew were out fishing in the Florida Everglades when they had an encounter with an unexplained creature that changed their lives forever, and it left them with more questions than answers. But before we get into their encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness, where I share encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter that you would like to share, please email it to me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button, as I'll be uploading multiple times every week. So don't forget to watch your wake as you make your way through the glades with the subscribe button, so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Gil, and it happened last year when him and his lifelong friend Andrew were out fishing in the Florida Everglades. The Florida Everglades is an absolutely expansive wetland wilderness located at the southwestern tip of Florida. It covers 1.5 million acres, but what makes this area so unique is all the wildlife that lives in this particular area. There's an absolutely huge population of alligators that live in the Everglades, as well as a couple different species of crocodiles as well. Now, those aren't the only things you need to worry about in the water, because it's not uncommon to come upon a bull shark in the Everglades, because bull sharks, they can live in salt, fresh, and brackish water. They've been spotted pretty far up into the Everglades, far from the coast. Now, closer towards the coast, there have been sightings and there have been reports of great whites. They're quite rare, but that does happen there as well. There's also multiple different venomous snakes in the area, venomous spiders, venomous plants. Some people joke around and say that it's pretty much the wetland version of Australia, where pretty much everything is deadly and everything can get you. None of that phases Gil and Andrew though, because they grew up in Florida and they had been fishing in the Everglades for over 40 years. So they knew exactly all the dangers in the area. They knew what to look out for and they knew how to be safe. So on the morning of their encounter, they got up, they drove out to the Everglades, they launched their small boat, and then they started making their way towards Whitewater Bay. Whitewater Bay is located pretty much right at the Gulf of Mexico, just inland east a little bit from the Gulf. So they had to drive through these little canal systems, winding through the glades as they went, but they had to go pretty slow because there's lots of areas in the Everglades that are called no-wake zones. And in those areas, you cannot drive your boat fast enough to make a wake because they do not want to disturb the shoreline, disturb the vegetation, or any of the wildlife there. So it took them quite a while to make it all the way to Whitewater Bay. For the majority of the ride out to Whitewater Bay, it was still full on dark outside. So Gil was driving the boat, Andrew was up at the front of the boat with a big handheld spotlight, and he was basically lighting the way for them as they made their way through the glades. Every now and then, when he would move the light side to side, all they would see poking up out of the water were alligator eyes. Now, that was completely normal for them. It's something they had seen hundreds of times, if not thousands of times before, so it did not faze them. So they just kept making their way towards Whitewater Bay. When they finally got to the bay, now it was daylight, and they decided they were going to fish kind of on the northeastern side of Whitewater Bay. They knew a couple little canals there that they had done really well in the past catching snook. So that's where they decided they were going to go. So they made their way up towards this one canal that they had fished before. They stopped the boat and they started fishing. They had fished for several hours, just letting the wind and the current just kind of drift them along the shoreline, going from channel to channel as they went. At one point, Andrew actually spotted something floating in the water up ahead of the boat. So he alerted Gil, and the two guys, they decided they were going to go check it out. So they made their way towards this object, and when they got closer to it, they realized it was actually an alligator. Their first thought was that the alligator was sunning itself, but when they got even closer to it, they realized that it definitely was not sunning itself. This thing was definitely dead. It was floating on its back, stomach up in the water, and when they got right up beside it, they noticed that its lower jaw looked like it had been pulled and torn from the socket, and it was actually still attached to the gator, but it was kind of lying, floating in the water right beside it. Their first thought was that this gator must have gone into a fight with another gator or a croc, got wounded, and that's how it died. They had come across dead alligators before. They actually came across a dead bull shark once, so it was nothing uncommon for them. So they just went about their day and continued to fish. About an hour and a half later, drifting along the shoreline, they were coming up to this one channel that they fished quite often, and it had always produced for them. Right as they got to the mouth of that channel, they decided for a minute, you know what, they're going to drop an anchor and they're just going to try fishing here for a little bit. So they dropped the anchor, kept casting their lines out, but they were not getting any action whatsoever. So they decided again, you know what, let's just keep drifting. So they pulled the anchor up and again let the wind and the current just kind of drift them along the shore. So both Gil and Andrew were actually standing in the boat, fishing off the side as it was drifting along the shoreline. They were just talking, having a good time, when all of a sudden the boat quickly jolted to the left and they almost fell out into the water. Luckily, they were able to drop down to their seats, grab onto the sides of the boat to kind of brace themselves, and they started looking around trying to figure out what just happened. Gil's first thought was that a gator must have hit the boat and that's what caused it to lean. So that's what he told Andrew. But then Andrew told him, well, I didn't feel anything hit the boat. He said it felt more like something was trying to climb into the boat. Gil thought about it for a second and he realized that Andrew was right because they did not actually feel anything hit the boat and they did not hear anything hit it as well. So he found that a little weird, but they just kind of sat there for a minute looking around, still trying to figure out exactly what happened. After a few more minutes, they decided they were just going to carry on fishing. So Andrew stood up, grabbed his rod, and as soon as he did that, all of a sudden they felt the boat slowly start to lean to the right. So Andrew was at the front. He turned to look towards the right side of the boat at the same time that Gil at the back of the boat turned to look as well. And they said they saw two hands that they describe as being grayish green with long webbed fingers with long claws on it, grabbing onto the side of the boat and pulling the side of the boat down towards the water. Andrew at the front of the boat completely freaked out at this point, took his fishing rod and actually threw it at those hands. And Gil at the back fired the boat up, and as soon as he fired the boat up, they said that the boat started to lead to the right even more, and it was getting closer towards the water. So Gil fired the boat up, cranked it to the left, and tried to take off to try to counteract that leaning. Luckily, he was able to succeed with that, and as soon as the boat started to take off, those hands let go. They drove for a little bit and they turned around to look back to where they were. And they said they're not 100% sure, but they're pretty sure that they saw what looked like a head disappearing down into the water. Now, neither of one of them have any idea what this was. Gil said that there's no way that this was an alligator or a crocodile. He grew up around alligators or crocodiles, and he said that their feet look nothing like those hands that they saw. So he has absolutely no idea what this could have been. Neither of them have ever heard of anything like that in the area before as well. But Gil said there's definitely something living in the Everglades. And he said whatever this was, he said it was super strong. To be able to pull his boat down like that with the two of them in there, he said this thing had some serious strength to it. And he's actually wondering if that alligator that they found, if that was not killed by that creature, just because he has never seen a gator like that before either. So Gil just says, when you're out of the glades, just be mindful that pretty much everything around you can and will kill you if he gets a chance. So he just said, keep in mind that on top of the unknown, there's all the gators, the crocs, the sharks, and he said just keep your head on a swivel. Well, that's it for today's encounter. This one was a little bit different than anything we've done on the channel before, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I don't know if it's because I'm from the prairies of Canada or not, and when I go swimming, I don't have to worry about anything eating me, but the thought of going out in a small boat in the Everglades, completely surrounded by alligators, crocodiles, and sharks, that's pretty creepy to me. Throw me in the bush with bears, wolves, and cats, and I'm good all day long. I don't know if I want to be surrounded by alligators, though. But as always, thanks for coming back, and if you haven't done so already, please watch your wake as you make your way through the glades with the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.